Hi everyone, we're going to just establish basic, these would be considered easy, sum and difference identities. And so we want the left side to look like the right side, and we're going to use these formulas, identity formulas. So basically, I'm going to start out slow, then I'm going to go faster. You might want to write these down. So this one, the first one we have is here. It looks like the sign with the plus. So I'm going to be using the pluses here. So we have sine of alpha, cosine of beta, plus or minus cosine of alpha. Oh, it's no minus. This is a plus. Okay. Cosine of alpha, sine of beta. In this case, this is my alpha, and this is my beta. So I'm just going to substitute. So I get sine of pi over 2 cosine of theta plus cosine of pi over 2 and sine of theta. We know sine of pi over 2 is 1, so I'm substituting. So that's 1 times cosine of theta plus we know that cosine of pi over 2 is 0 times sine of theta. Well, this knocks this out here, so we're left with cosine of theta, and therefore it matches. So we have cosine of theta equals cosine of theta. Okay, so that's the general idea how to do it. We're going to go a little faster. We have cosine, and we know the formula for cosine. This would be your alpha, this would be your beta. And we know that cosine of alpha, cosine of beta, minus, remember it's opposite on this one, sine of alpha, sine of beta. And we want it to equal that. So let's plug everything in. Cosine of pi over 2 times cosine of theta minus sine of pi over 2 sine of theta. We know from the last one that cosine of pi over 2 is 0. So 0 times cosine of theta minus this equals 1 times sine of theta. This gets knocked out, so we get negative sine of theta, which equals what we want. So this equals negative sine of theta. So it works out. So pretty basic. Let's go a little faster. This one, we're going to do, I'm not going to write the formula down. So you're just going to have sine of pi times cosine of theta. It's a minus, we put minus cosine of pi sine of theta. Well, sine of pi is 0 minus cosine of pi is negative 1 times sine of theta. This gets knocked out, so two negatives make a positive, so we get sine of theta, which is our desired result. All right, we'll go a little faster. You have your formulas. You should have them written down. So this is going to be cosine of pi, cosine of theta. And remember, it's opposite here, so now we're going to put plus sine of pi, sine of theta. Okay, cosine of pi is negative 1, so that knocks that out, times cosine of theta. Sine of pi is 0 times sine of theta. That knocks that out, so we get negative cosine of theta equals negative cosine of theta. All right, and let's go a little faster. Sine of pi, cosine of theta, plus cosine of pi, sine of theta. Sine of pi is 0, so that's 0 knocks this out. Cosine of pi is negative 1 times sine of theta, which is going to equal negative sine of theta. So that checks. Another one. So we have cosine of pi, cosine of theta, minus sine of pi, sine of theta. This will be negative 1 for that, times cosine of theta minus sine of pi is 0 times sine of theta. So it's negative cosine of theta minus 0 equals negative cosine of theta, which equals negative cosine of theta. So it all checked out. All right, here's a little different one. We have sine of 3 pi over 2 cosine of theta plus cosine of 3 pi over 2 sine of theta. We know that sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1. So then we have times cosine of theta. We know this equals 0 times sine of theta. So this whole thing gets knocked out. We get negative cosine of theta equals negative cosine of theta. And one more. Cosine 3 pi over 2 cosine of theta minus sine of 3 pi over 2 sine of theta. So this equals 0. So that's going to knock that whole thing out. Sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1 times sine. Two negatives make a positive, so we get sine of theta equals sine of theta. Okay, the next one we're going to do a couple with tangent in it, and then after that we're going to do harder identities. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.